The Torah portion of Eikev that we're about to read this week, loaded with many mitzvot. Sefer HaChinuch, the book of Chinuch, education, he listed 8 mitzvot, 6 positive and 2 negative. Before I go to our talk today, I want to thank several colleagues and friends. I want to thank Rabbi Feldman from Ner Israel, who give me the time whenever I need to answer questions, especially in this subject. I want to thank Rabbi Baruch Rosenblum from Bnei Brak, and I want very much to thank Rabbi Nachman Villalem as well from Bnei Brak. So with that, the subject I would like to share with you today, it's indirect mitzvah from this parsha. It is not one of the 8 direct mitzvot in the parsha, but it is a mitzvah that apply in many avenues in the Torah, and some rabbis hold that the source is in this week's Torah portion. In the second segment of Shema, in the second paragraph of Shema that we read every single day, there is a line that said, "Venatati esev besadcha livhemtecha ve'achalta ve'savata." I shall provide grass in your field for your cattle, and you will eat and you will be satisfied. So the subject I would like to share with you today is the issue of animals and people and Jewish law. Many of you have 1, 2, 3 and more animals in your possession. 2 of our members have the animal shelter. Since the issue of Jewish law and animals is a broad issue, what we're going to touch today, and soon you see how it's connected to the Torah portion, is the question of who, what, where, and how when it's come to animals and people. Some examples. Do we allow, by Jewish law, to beat up animals? An example, look at some people who ride horses. We have 2 members who owns horses here. How about those, especially in the ancient time, who use donkey in the field? And sometimes the donkey is standing and refuses to move. How about cursing animals? When you're unhappy and you express your frustration to the animal, is that allowed? How about feeding animals? When it's come to my animal's food and my food, who's taking precedence? In other words, I walk in my home and let's say some of you have cat, dog, aquarium with fish and other things, and you're hungry and your dog is hungry. So by Torah law, or by rabbinic law, soon you see the difference, when and how and who take precedence. Should I give my animals his or her food first and then I should eat, or not? How about drinking? Do I allow to go ahead and drink first? Or if my animal is barking or whatever it is, should I give him or her their drinking first and then I should drink? And we can elaborate much more because there is a lot of applications in this mitzvah. The point of departure is in a Talmud. In a Talmud, in the Tractate Brachot, which is now the tractate that we study for Daf Yomi, page 40, I would like to quote the Talmud. They said as follows. As you know, in Shema, in the prayer that we said, affirmation of faith every day, the second segment is V'hayayim Shamua, is this segment. And the Talmud said, the reason that we have this order, the first, it's a portion of Ve'ahavta, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your resources. And then the second one, the stick and carrot, which is if you listen to the word of the Lord and that's what's happened to you, and if you're not, etc. The reason for that, the Mishnah tells us, because first we have to accept the yoke of heaven to understand that there is God watching over what we are doing. And then when we're doing that, then we can go ahead and do it daily mundane needs. Another point that the Mishnah tells us, that this important mitzvah of Shema apply to a person for all day long. As long as you are awake, you have to be aware that God is watching you and watching your behavior. So, twice a day, doing Shema, we said, Venatati Esev, and I should provide a grass in your field for your cattle, for your animals, and then you should eat and you should sustain. So the Talmud said as follows. Tractate Brachot, chapter 6, page 40. Amar Rav said, if one recite Hamotzi, the prayer upon eating bread, but then interrupted by saying, take a piece of the bless, take a piece of a bless, he does not have to recite the blessing again before eating the bread himself. But if he said, bring salt, he must recite the blessing again before eating. Meaning, as you know, when we eat bread, we wash our hands, then we say the blessing, the hamutzi, and we eat. But if you pay attention, since we considering our table as an altar and the food as the offering, so we place a salt, and when we eat the bread after the blessing, we combine the bread with the salt. So what happened if you say that blessing and you are looking, you don't find the salt? Can you stop at the middle and ask for the salt? In other words, it's all combination of one thing. You're thanking God for the food, and then you slice the bread, you combine it with salt, and you eat it. So what happened if you realize that there is no salt there? So they said the idea is he must recite the blessing again before eating, because he should not do, which call in halacha hefsek, he should not divide, he should not stop in between. However, according to halacha, a person can do that because it's part of what need. He needs to have a salt, so he's not considering stopping at the middle. Now they ask a question. How about if a person has an animal, let's say he have an ox, and he is now about to eat, so he said, bring salt, and he does not have to recite the blessing again, but if he said, need to burn with water for the oxen, or need for the oxen, so Rav Sheshet said, even if he said need for the oxen, he does not have to recite the blessing again. Why? For Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, it is forbidden for a person to eat before he give food to his animals. For it's stated in the biblical verse, and I will provide grass in your field for your cattle, and only then the Torah states, and you will eat and be satisfied. So it means, according to Jewish law, according to halacha, when a person needs to eat, first and foremost, he must feed his animals, and then he allowed to eat, because the Torah specifically said, you first, I provide a grass in the field for your cattle, which cattle is just an example, can be any animals, and then you shall eat and you shall be satisfied. So in a sense, the Almighty, the creator of all creatures, require us first to feed our animals and then to eat. So in a sense, not only when you need salt, but even you realize that your ox or whatever you have in your house, the dog, cat, whatever it is, they need to be fed, it's okay by halacha to go ahead and say something to bring them the food, because you have the obligation, you have the mitzvah to feed them first, and then you can eat. And that's, by the way, the code of Jewish law said, and I paraphrase his word. He said that the person who stopped and said, look at this dog, you have to feed him, and he said to somebody in his household, feed him, and he waiting for them to be fed, it's considering part of the seuda, part of the meal, and it's okay. So in other words, if you do it while you wash your hand, between the tilat yadayim, washing your hand, and saying hamotzi, so it's considering a tzorech seuda, a part of the meal. So the way that Rav Sheshet tell us here in the Talmud, since we are forbidden to eat before our animals, because the Torah said that animals take precedence before us, so therefore we follow this Rav Sheshet point of view, that first we need to feed the animals and then we can eat. The Magen Avraham in the code said it clearly that that's the way it should be. Now, the root for that mitzvah, it's called Tzar Balei Chayim. We are forbidden to inflict any type of sorrow upon animals. It's written many times in the Torah. One of the sources, it's in the book of Numbers. Soon you see the whole source, but the first is in a Talmud Tractate Ta'anit, page 9. And again, I'm quoting from the Talmud. Meitivei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer. That name of rabbi, he said as follows: שלושה פרנסים טובים עמדו להם לישראל, אלו הן משה ואהרון ומרים. Their excellent leaders arose from Israel. They are Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, and because of them, 3 excellent gifts were bestowed upon Israel. And here are they. Here they are, the well, as long as they in a desert, because of the prophetess Miriam, they have the well of water, the pillar of cloud, and the manna. The well was provided in the merit of Miriam, the biblical prophetesses, the pillar of cloud in the merit of Aaron, and the manna from heaven in the merit of Moses. However, when the prophetess Miriam passed away, the well disappeared, as it said, and Miriam died there, and immediately after that, the verse, it's written, and there is no water for the community to drink because the well had disappeared. So you see here a special situation that they have a well in a desert because of Miriam, and when they have no water, people complain. And the Torah tells us, and I just paraphrase the word of the Torah, that people start complaining against Moses and Aaron, and they said, how we'll be able to survive here in the wilderness without water, what we're going to do, and it was a tremendous complaint. So the Torah said, and they used the word, and why you brought us here to this desert? People complain against Moshe and Aaron, and they said, why did you brought us to this desert to die here, we and our animals? So the Midrash, it's called Yalkut Shimoni, is one of the Midrashic. He said as follows: praiseworthy are the righteous people. I translate the word of the Midrash. Praiseworthy are the righteous people that their animals they consider as part of their own body. What does that mean? Because the Torah said in this chapter, why should we die, we and our animals? Meaning that the nation, the generation of the desert, they worry that they're about to die. Since Miriam passed away, is no well, they're afraid that they're not going to have water. And how they complain, they did not only complain saying, we'll die because of thirst. They said, and why should we die, we and our animals? So the rabbis here ask a question, and the question is asked, why they need to have the animals, why they need to express caring for the animals? Why they need, in a sense, a person is about to die. So if he or she is about to die, if they are dying, so they are dying. So why did they so much care for their animals? In other words, we know that we all connected to our animals, those who owns animals. But if a person is in desert and going to die, so they're going to die. What type of business is this to complain over the animals? So they said here, he explained, one of the great sages in our contemporary is named Rabbi Isaac Sher. I heard it from Rabbi Baruch Rosenblum, and I think it's a fascinating thought. He also heard it from Rabbi Shraga Grossberg, who's my teacher many, many years ago. He said this is one of the foundation. They said there are two categories of people. There are people who's always in a sense of need more. Like the Talmud said, you have 100, you want 200. You have 200, you want 400. You never die and you're fully satisfied what you have. That's typical people behavior. Righteous people have a different feeling. When they have something, they feel that it's like a gift from the Lord. It's like something like God gave it to me in order to safeguard something. So for example, if God granted me an animal, regardless if I purchase it or I just take it from the animal shelter or whatever it is, or a friend of mine gave it to me, if I'm granted to have this animal, it's a gift. It's a creature of the Lord. It's gift. And therefore, I should treat it as a God property. And since it's a God property, I have to carry a special feeling toward my animals. And therefore, he said, one of the Midrash followed the story of Yaakov about Jacob, that Jacob, even he started poor, but after he left his father-in-law of 22 years of work, hard work, he came back wealthy. However, the Torah said that he returned for small thing that he forgotten. So the rabbis dwell on that and said, why Jacob, when he turned wealthy, he need to go back and pick up these small things? And they said it's a message to learn here, that even a person in a state of wealth or vice versa, he should value every gift that Lord gives him. He should not belittle even small things. That's we learn from Jacob. Otherwise, it looks like you belittle the heavenly gift. If God gave you something, you should be very thankful to what He gave you. So that's the idea what we said in the second portion of Shema. We said, I should provide it in your field a grass for your cattle, for your animals. You feed them, and then you feed yourself, and you shall be satisfied. Which means that's part of the whole concept of acceptance of heaven. Fear of heaven, acceptance of heaven. That we treated any gift or any property that God gave us as something that we have it temporarily, and it's a present, and therefore, including our own animals, we should treat it the way that we treated anything else. And by the way, that's a very important concept, because let's face it, some people treating the animals differently. There are people who feed the animals and they fed to make them fat, so when they are fat, they can sell them for more money. Or if it's cow, they feed them with more so they can squeeze more milk out of them, okay? However, the righteous people is different. It's opposite in a way. They treat it as a gift from the Lord, as something that is a Lord's property. And since it's God's property, it's a temporarily. Now, since that's the feeling of that generation, the generation that saw so many miracles, the people who left Egypt, therefore, when they saw a lack of water, they did not complain only for themselves. It's going to show you the greatness of that generation, that they complain not only about themselves, and they said, why should we die and our animals since our animals is part of our responsibility. In the Tanakh, in the book of Samuel, there is a very famous story about the first Jewish king, King Saul. And King Saul was granted with a lot of the livestock. All of a sudden, it was an incident in the first book of Samuel that unfortunately King Saul lost a large amount of his livestock, the donkeys. So what did he do? He went to quote unquote the shepherd. Who is the shepherd? Is just a nickname for the leader of that generation, which is the prophet. He went to the prophet, great prophet Samuel, and he said, what should I do now? So the big question is, imagine if someone, let's say, if you, Eli, God forbid you lose your dog, you're going to come to me as your rabbi and you're going to say, okay, can you help me? Obviously, it looks like not. So how come King Saul went to the prophet Samuel and he said, what should I do now? The answer is exactly what we said earlier. If a person understands that those animals are temporarily gift from God and it's a God property, then you go to a person who quote unquote represents God, which is the prophet in that sense. And even if you are the king of the Jewish people, you go and you ask as a righteous man, so what should I do now? Why? Because the rabbis tells us that King Saul carried a feeling, not because of money, but because he felt that I'm not treating the God's property properly. Because I'm supposed to safeguard a gift from God, which is the livestock. Now we see what we said earlier. Praiseworthy are righteous people, that their property, their wealth, they treat it as their own. What does that mean? That the whole idea, when a person carries something, they said about, the rabbis tell us in the Midrash, in Vayikra Rabbah, the rabbi said the story about the elder of Hillel, who was the president, the head of the Jewish people. And he said at the end of one of his sessions, he said, I'm going now to serve God by taking shower. So his student said to him, Rabbi Hillel, what do you mean? So he said, think about it. If the guy that works in a museum and he is treating those sculptures, all those different things, and he cleans them periodically, since my body belongs to the Lord, when I'm cleaning my body, I'm serving God. So what I try to tell you is the same mindset here. When it's come to treating animals, treating your body, it's all part of the picture that it's a temporarily God's property that's given to us. That's the way we see our lives. And now we understand why the code of Jewish law, one of the great leading rabbi in the code is called Magen Avraham. He said in the code, those who wants to see it is in the 271, he said that even a person stopped and said, bring a salt or bring a food for my animal, for my ox, for my dog, it's not considering some type of hefsek, stopping in between, because we are forbidden to eat before our animals, and he holds that it's a biblical precept, it's a biblical commandment. Not everyone agree with that. Bi'ur Halacha, it's one of the leading rabbis, he said in the code, those who wants to see it is in chapter 167, he said that it's a great mitzvah, but it's a rabbinic. So yes, a person should not stop, but it's not a biblical, it's rabbinic. So what we understand so far, regardless if it's a biblical or rabbinic, it is clear that we have to give animal the food first. So if you are an animal owner, you have to give your animals the food first, and then you're allowed to eat, and that's mainly because of that biblical chapter. How about drinking? Is that the same rules? In other words, if I'm thirsty and my animal is also thirsty, should I drink first or should I give my animals their drink first? Do we treat food and drink the same manner? Soon you see that it's not so simple because it's a controversy between the rabbis. And soon you see the rationale is not just simple thing, it's a serious discussion. Magen Avraham, which is one of the leading ruling rabbi, he quoted a book from 11th century. It's called Sefer Hasidim. Sefer Hasidim is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassie, which was one of the greatest, awesome Jewish leader at 11th century, who said in chapter 531, 3 points why a person's first and the animal's second when it's come to drinking. Why? Why we say that if it's come to feeding animals, the animals taking precedence, but if I need to drink, I should drink first. Number one, he said, if you read in the book of Genesis, the Torah tells us that Rebecca, you remember that story that Eliezer came and he was searched for a wife for Isaac, and he met this young Rebecca. So when she fed Eliezer, what happened? She said something, you should drink, and then I shall dig in and feed your camels. So since the great matriarch Rebecca did it, it means that we should drink first. One source. Then when Eliezer, Abraham's servant, quoted Rebecca, when he reported, he said the same thing. I drank, and then Va'esht v'gam agbalim hishkata. First I drank, and then she served the camels. The third source, the Torah tells us, V'hishkita et ha'eda be'ed beiram. When God approached Moses and said to him, you should use a certain way of the rock that bring the water. So you should, V'hishkita, you should bring from the new source of wells, new source of water, the congregation and the animals. So since the Torah said in the talk between God and Moses, you should take this well and give the drink to people and then the animals, we derive from that the idea that when it's come to drinking, we should drink first. However, other rabbis, it's a great rabbi by the name of Pardes Yosef, he said in his commentary on the Torah portion Chayei Sarah, he said, if you think that when it's come to drinking, person should drink first, but eating animal first, he said, I have more logical, rational reasons. And he quotes from another book that's called Meloa Omer, and he said as follows: if you measure, in that sense, put aside all these sources, think realistically, what happened? If person wants to drink, you need a bottle of water, you need a cup of water, and it's fine for you. Animals, usually they need to drink more, okay? Food, however, is the opposite. When it's come to food, what happened? We saw it this weekend. We have the privilege to have Eddie, Scully, Eddie Ellison, prepare the food for this weekend. So you see, Eddie Scully is the chef in the White House for more than 2 decades, right? So, we are blessed to have Friday night dinner preparing by him and Ellison, and we are very thankful for that. But you see that the preparation took long time. The food was delicious, but the preparation took long time. So the rabbis derive from that the whole idea that when it's come to food, here is a difference. For people, it takes long time of preparation. For animals, you just put the whatever they want, the stock, the bone, whatever they need, you put before them, enough, they can eat. So in other words, it's not involved in tremendous preparation. So therefore, you see the rationale, the rabbi said that's the rationale beside of the sources, why you're treating differently when it's come to drinking. The drinking, we should drink first. However, there is a book called Nezer HaKodesh. He quoted something that we said every Saturday afternoon from the book of Psalms. They said, Adam uvehema toshia Hashem, the Almighty God redeemed men and animals. That's the famous source. So he said, and listen carefully to what he said, because that's a very important key of our talk today. He said, Adam nizon lif'amim bizchuta shel behemto. Many times an animal's owner has a food from the Almighty God, not because he or she deserved it, but because of the merit of the animals. Which means, in our language, I'm not deserved to have my lunch because I committed a sin or whatever the reason is, but God bring me with kindness because of my animal. An example for that, it's a very broad known tradition for people for 40 days or whatever to say a Perek Shira. Perek Shira is the special chapter songs of singing of animals, different sources of different prayer for different animals. Is a collection from the entire Bible. You see different books with all these beautiful pictures. It means that sometimes my animals bringing me my livelihood, my nourishment, their merit. Since the rabbi said, you don't know why you have now your food on the table, let's face it, you have to this very day millions of people worldwide that the dream of life is to have a cup of coffee. There are people, they have close to nothing around the world. I read a statistic the other day in the Washington Post that if you measure the entire world, those who considering the top of the 8% of the population are people that have above $15 in their pocket. If you collected the entire world population, $15 in the pocket. So when you are able to put the food on your table, you don't know what's the privilege, the merits that you have. Maybe it's because of your animals. So therefore, if you think that way, now you see why the Almighty God who created everything requested what? To feed the animal first and then myself. So that idea of the Sefer Hasidim, 11th century, the Magen Avraham, the great halachic rabbi puts, and he said that's the reason. However, there is another school of thought. It's a book called Eliyahu Rabbah. He disagrees and he has much stronger opinion. He says, forget about drinking. He says, in anything and everything, animals first. Not only in the food, also in drinking, you have to feed the animals first. If the animal need to drink, you have to give them the drink first and then you should drink. Why? He brings several sources. One book, it's called Ktav Sofer, is great Hungarian rabbi. He brought it from his father, Chatam Sofer, who said, since we quoted Talmud in Brachot that said, you should eat, you should be satisfied, and you should bless your Lord your God. Ve'achalta, you should eat. That's applied to what? To food. Ve'savata, and you should be satisfied. One of rabbinic interpretation, it's applied to drinking. Not everyone who has food is able to access water. Look sometimes in history of land of Israel that is a lack of water. So therefore he disagrees with all those sources, and he says, for example, what we said earlier about Rebecca and all of that, he said that's not applicable. And he said, if you want, I can prove it to you. Trace a scenario that your friend walk in your house as a guest for supper, and your friend walk in with his or her dog. Now, who's supposed to get the food first? Your guest or your guest animal? The answer is no. Who is supposed to get the food first? Your guest. Why? Because the obligation, as we said earlier, applied to whom? To animal's owner. But that obligation does not apply to someone else. So therefore, since those camels that the biblical Eliezer brought wasn't his, it was his master Abraham's property. Therefore, he held that people, especially when it's come to drink, people before the animals. He said the other source that they say that you should vishkita, you should give the drinking first. He said it's not. So in short, what we see here, it's either in the opinion that you say that you can eat. Let's put it this way: everybody agree when it's come to food, you should feed your animals first if you are the animal's owner. Drinking, there is a different opinion. There are those who hold that even drinking you have to feed the animal first. There are those who said no, you can drink first. Why? The Talmud said in Tractate Gittin, page 62, Asur le'adam she'it'om klum kodem she'iten libehemto. A person is forbidden to eat anything before he feeds his animals. So from that school of thought and point of departure, we'll go further. And we're going to discuss now the whole concept, which is creating or afflicting sorrow upon animals. An example, you go to a park and you hear people, unfortunately, cursing the animals. Do we care for that? Or it's a violation of some Torah law? Think about it. If you call your cat, whatever it is, names, or you call your cat dog, so does that makes any difference? So soon you see by the rabbis, yes, it makes a difference. How? They said, the rabbi said, if you have, for example, a donkey, and the donkey refused to serve you, refused to move and to go and to do something, right? So what some people does, they start beating the donkey. The rabbi said, wait a second. Guess what you have to do? You have to send him to Dr. Weisberg or Dr. Ratner. Why? Because those veterinarians, right? Why? Because maybe he's sick. It means that you have to be careful even the way you talk to the animals. You have to judge them favorably. Another source, it's Rabbi Yaakov Balaturim. He said, the Torah tells us in the book of Leviticus, Parashat Tazria, the Torah speaks about animals, bringing sacrificial offering for animals. So if you look carefully at the text, the Torah said all the times certain animals first. Let me share with you an example. They said as follows, and I'm reading from the book of Leviticus, just text from the Torah. They said, chapter 1, and if his offering to the Lord be a burnt offering of foals, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. So if you look carefully, you see that the turtle dove, it's always first. Any place in the Torah. Only one place you don't find it, when you have a woman that deliver a baby, and after that is a process, and she needs to bring an offering of thanksgiving. So they said, upon that, she needs to bring an offering. So they said, first, she needs to bring the pigeons, and then she needs to bring others. So what's the reason they do that? So they explain as follows. The Talmud said in Tractate Eruvin, page 100. Ilmalei nitna Torah, ayilu lomdim gezel minemala. If we do not have the Torah, we can learn a lot of biblical ethics from those animals. Take, for example, ants. The small, tiny, minute animal. If you look at the lab research, what you find out, that the minutes one ant touch a little, tiny, minute of food, of stock, others will not touch it. Why is that? It's because we can learn the whole idea of taking property that not belongs to us from those animals. Another thing is, if you look at the cat, after the cat release himself, they always cover. Right? So again, you can learn modesty from the cat. Or you can learn from the dove the whole idea of the relationship, because the dove is very loyal to his mate. So the sages, in a very general statement, they said if you look at the dove, they have two eggs, and that two babies and basically are made for the whole life. Now, what happened is, the Nachmanides tell us something very important. And I would like to quote the word by word of the Maimonides and explain it. He said, when they, this is a book of Leviticus, Nachmanides, chapter 1, sentence 14. Why did the Torah selected those two important animals, which is the dove and the pigeons? They said, אבל בתורים הגדולים רצתה התורה בעבור פרישותם והידבקם בידוע מהם. Very important. The male dove, when he lost his mate, he never looked for another. He stayed widow for the rest of his life. The female, Nachmanides said, she, in our language, go out and remarry. So now you see, Nachmanides said, why the entire Torah, the male, it's always pair, one for the offering of Olah, one for the offering of sin offering, and we always put the doves, the pair of doves first, right? Why? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty said, if you are breaking the couple, right, you should break the dove's female, but not the male. Why? Because if she will be alone, she is going to remarry. If the male dove will be alone, he will remain widow forever. So therefore, we learn something very important. Let me read it word by word. He said here, שכיוון שעבד בן זוגו לא ידבק באחר לעולם, because he lost his mate, he will stay a widow for the rest of his life. וכן ישראל, it's a reflection to us, דבוקים בהשם אלוקיהם ולא ידבקו בחר אחר לעולם. And the same by us, that we monotheistic, we attach to God and no other God. אבל היונים קנאים מאוד, ובקנאתם יתפרדו ויתחלפו. Which means the female, they are sometimes jealous and sometimes they change their mate. על כן לא בחר בהם אלא הקטנים קודם שיזדווגו. Therefore the Almighty chose from them only the little one before they find a mate. כי העינה בקטנותה, when she is a little baby, that's different. אז תוספת אהבה בכן גדוליה. So in other words, as long as they are a little baby, it's fine to take them an offering. But the minute the female found the mate, so he no longer can take an offering, and he bring a source from the guy for the perplex of the Maimonides. So in short, you see the reason for that. So another source, in another biblical chapter, Metzorah, the entire chapter is using the Hebrew letter Vav all the time when they want to attach sentences. Only one place, when they're speaking about slaughtering certain birds for offering in ancient biblical time. So the Torah said, Et hatzipor hachaya. This is the only time the Torah did not use the letter Vav, and in short, the rabbis tells us that because it is forbidden to slaughter one animal when the other animal is watching it. It is forbidden by the Torah, which is again derived from the idea that we are forbidden to inflict any type of sorrow, including one animal sees the other animal suffering. So where is the source? The source, they said in the book of Exodus, that when you see the donkey of your fellow, and the fellow need to load it and unload it from the donkey, you have to go ahead and help your fellow. Why? So the Talmud tells us in Tractate Brachot, regardless if it's a biblical or rabbinic, they say that it's the whole idea that you're not allowed to cause sorrow to animals. So one of the reasons, even that guy you don't like, but he needs help with loading or unloading, especially unloading from animals, since the animal is suffering every second that they loaded at the top, for example, of a donkey, you have the biblical obligation to reduce the suffering of the animal or to eliminate that. Another thing is, the Torah said in Leviticus, Parashat Eikev, the Torah said that shor kesev, if you have any type of ox or goats that you need to have shivat yamim tachat imo, you need to be under his mother for 7 days. Why 7 days? So the Torah said that the mother delivered the child, the mother cow or the mother whatever, she needs to see the child for at least a week. You cannot take away at that time. Another biblical important concept is the idea that we're not allowed to slaughter a child and the father. We mean oto v'beno, for example, ox. If you need to have an offering of those times, you cannot take a ox offering of a father and a child and slaughter them at the same day. So you may ask a question, what's the problem? I can take I separate them, go to a different location, and can do that. What's the problem? So one of the translations, it's called Yonatan ben Uziel, which was a ancient a sage. He explained and he said, we have to follow the attribute of God. Since God is a God of almighty and full of compassion and mercy, we should train ourselves as people who are born in the image of God to have this type of compassion. And the Zohar elaborates on that, and he said, the root from that is the way that you get used to your traits. If you get yourself to cruelty to animals, therefore, this is the two components. The way that you act is the way that your heart and soul and mind behave. And since you constantly act in the cruelty, it makes you a cruel person. So that's the idea. The same applied to Nachmanides that said in the Mitzvah, they said in the book of Deuteronomy that you see a baby mother and the baby together, and sometimes you need to separate them. So you have to be very careful, because the idea is that we have to have compassion on them. Nachmanides and also Maimonides said it in the Guide for the Perplexed, that the animal soul and the human soul in that sense is the same, which means the animals carry the feeling, those rabbis said, of the sorrow when they see something like that happen to them when you separate them. So the Khatam Sofer, for example, tells us that if you are in a doubt of Shiluach HaKen, if you're afraid that it's not going to be the mother but the father, you cannot do that. Furthermore, the Torah tells us in the several places. For example, they said, "Lo tachrosh b'shor v'chamor yachdav." You're not allowed to go and use ox and donkey together in a field, which means you need to do some type of labor in the field. You can't use two species of animals together. Why? So they said that it's the idea. Ibn Ezra explained, "Ki ein koach hachamor kekoach hashor." The strength of a donkey, it's different than the strength of the ox, because it creates a great sorrow for the donkey, because he looks at the ox and he sees that the ox has a different capability, and he is basically suffer and he is jealous and he is so we basically have two species. We are not allowed, it's a biblical precept, it's a biblical commandment, we're not allowed to do work together with both. So he go Balaturim and he said Bet Bamsorah. They use the same terminology in both, because they said in the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, they said, Lo tachrosh al re'acha ra'ah. You should not think on your fellow bad while he is staying with you and he doesn't know what you're doing. So the same language, the same words they use in both, lacharosh, which means, you're not allowed to create for those creatures any type of sorrow, afflicted sorrow, even in their emotion, in their feelings. So you cannot use them both. So the same way the Sefer HaChinuch tell us in Tav Kuf Nun, in the one of the mitzvah, it says, "Vehu adin kol shnei binei behema." Any type of animals you cannot do together, because if one is in one species and the other is different, and you use both of them in a field, it creates sorrow for them. It's either suffering for different capability, it's different jealousies, it's different in the way that they eat. And we derive from that very important thing, that If you have, for example, a job, or you have a shidduch, a match between two people, so you shouldn't match two. It can be in the working place, can be in the business world, can be in the army service, can be as a husband and wife. That they are really, in our language, two different worlds, two different species. We're not allowed, because you're inflicting pain upon the soul of people that it's not necessary. So, because you have to choose certain people, for example, you're in charge once, right, in AOL for human resources, right? So if you think about it, when you need to match a person and you need to have several jobs, so if you need an executive VP or you need a certain people for certain jobs, you have to be careful, even you set them up, that they should match not only the job but also the co-worker and the other people that they work together. Because otherwise, if you have two species together in our language, you're creating an environment of tension and suffering for people. So that's the same said about when you have a ox or donkey and the donkey carry a food and he's hungry. So you're not allowed only to use the donkey for the food. You have to feed the donkey from the food. It's an act of appreciation. It's act of, in a sense, it's not just your employee. It's part of yourselves. And you have to treat them in a certain decorum of respect. So when it's come to food, if the ox is working for you and now you have some food there, so you have to let him, you cannot put a muzzle on his mouth in fear that he may be going to eat something from what you're supposed to collect. It's part of the mitzvah in the Torah. So what we learned so far, because we discussed a lot of subject here, there's several conclusions we can derive from that. First of all, we learned the whole idea when we're matching people. We have to be very careful to make sure that it's something that makes sense, not to create tension between the two. The Midrash Tanchuma tells us about when Bil'am beat up his donkey. You know, he smashed the donkey several times, 3 times. So when the angel appeared to him, what did they basically, the angel said to him? So he said to him, this donkey doesn't have any ancestry, any merits. And you beat up the donkey, right? And you talk to the donkey in a certain way, okay? And now this is a full nation of Israel. You're going to curse them, you're going to annihilate them, that they have all this merit of the ancestors. So the same way is here, when it's come to animals, it's a very serious matter that we should be very careful. Another thing we can learn is the whole idea that Talmud tells us about a famous story on the Rebbe. They said that Rabbi Yeahuda Hanassie suffered 13 years. It's a few version. Either they say that he have a teeth, root canal and teeth issues, or general suffering. The story goes that it was a calf, small calf that ran, and while he was teaching or he's staying at home, Rabbi, the calf ran and hid itself under his big garments. And in a sense, the calf was crying, saying, they're about to slaughter me. And at the first glance, Rabbi said to him, what do you want? That's part of what you have to do. You have to go for slaughtering. That's your destiny. And as a result, the rabbi said that for 13 years, he suffered greatly. It's a famous Talmudic story. Yet, 13 years later, one time, the house worker, the maid or whatever, works for him, and they discover some type of mice in the house. Not just one mice, but mice that create others, and they run around all over. And Rabbi at that time said to his maid, leave them alone, don't touch them. And the Talmud said miraculously from that point he was healed. It's a very famous Talmudic text. So they want to tell us that a very important foundation when it's come to the Sefer Hasidim said, Ve'al yikaneh, even a person not yechaneh, not allowed to call the animals bad names, not allowed to curse them. And it goes to something very mystical, but just to get you the vignette, the feeling of, they said, since the Torah mentions so many rules when it's come to treating animals, you have to think Kabbalistic for a second. What is the Kabbalistic teaching? They said the whole concept of transmigration is the idea that one of the transmigrations, the rabbi said, the person may turn and come back in the form of animals. That's a famous type of Kabbalistic teaching. So with that in mind, a person should think the way that I'm treating my animals, right, I may be treated in that way. In other words, from heaven they look upon me. If you are riding your donkey the way that you ride your horse, it may turn around the opposite way. So that's the way you will be treated by heaven. So it's like, for example, the code tells us if you have a maid that walks in your house, you cannot afford to have her or him. So you give it to your friend, but you know that that person is a very cruel person, you're not allowed to transfer that employee to them. Why? Because they said that it's a measure for measure. The same way that they serve you, God can turn the pyramid around, God forbid. And therefore, if you need certain animal for certain things, in heaven they learn how the way that you treated animal, they will treated you. So it's always the story of Rabbi and all of that. In the same ways that you have compassion upon others, including your animals, that's the way you should treat it. I would like to conclude with a word from great Rabbi Chaim Fallaji. It's a great Sephardic rabbi. He said in the book of Rabbi Chaim, chapter 12, and I quote, he said, "Kshiyesh chole betoch beito," if a person, God forbid, have a sick person in his house, what he should do, he said, "Ya'aser hamanut afilu im ofot hashamayim," which means he should go out, he should feed the animals, whatever he have around his house, and therefore he said, "Ubaduku benusei sheyivakshu alav rachamim," and therefore those animals will go and pray the Lord on his behalf, including birds and other animals. In other words, he said, and that's by the way the code said too in the Taf Reish Hey, in the 605, he said, if im yesh chole shetzarich rachamim, if God forbid is in your house a sick person that need compassion, yasim ma'achal al hagagot afur ha'ofot, you should go to the roof and you leave some food for the animals, and therefore those animals will be fed by him, will pray for extra compassion for the person. So what we learn from that? We learn a lot of things when it comes to treating animals. First, you see the law in a sense of feeding animals, that it's a serious biblical commandment. When it's come to your animals, you should appreciate what you have. It's a gift, it's temporarily gift from God, and they take precedence before you, at least for the food. Drinking is the controversy. As far as treating animals, you see how much respect you have to give, including what they need to do to be done. So now I want to add something very important. One should say, okay, so I should be totally vegan. And some people are fully vegan, like Anne and others are vegan. But in Judaism, we don't say that. We say that we should do what we need in our minimum. If someone needs protein or someone needs certain animals, if you do it in the minimum payment, painless as much as you can for those animals. In the whole process of shechita, if you look carefully, it's the most painless to animal, without any type of cruelty, and you need it solely for your survival, then it's okay. If you read carefully the story of the children of Noah, God allowed them to use certain animals for their survival. But again, you have to differentiate between that and any other type of treating animals. So to wrap it up, we learn many lessons for our lives. The way that we treated others, including animals, that's the way it's always measure for measure in any avenue of our life and afterlife as well.
I